right, next we are going to look at Stealthwatch's host groups. So by default, we are going to have these two types of host groups. Notice that we have inside and outside. So just like you would think, anything that's inside are all of the groups or hosts that we've identified to be part of our network. And they are generally going to be addresses within our infrastructure, and a lot of times it's automatically defined in Stealthwatch, but we can, of course, get in there and get more granular as far as some additional categories. So underneath inside hosts, if we want to make sub host groups, we can start doing that. There is actually going to be a catch-all. We'll talk about that here in a minute. That's always going to be there, and that can't be deleted. But we can start by maybe adding things by business unit or by function. So if we created some by function, here are devices that might be in our DMZ, load balancers, scanners. This is going to be kind of a good example here in a moment when we talk about some of the policies that we can apply to each of these groups. We can also see that there's things that we can spin up by, location, so on and so forth. Now, as far as outside goes, these are generally things that have not been specified. They're not part of our network. So we can actually go in and we can create some groups or some subordinates underneath the outside hosts that maybe are automatically divvied up by country if we're looking at geo IP information. We can put trusted internet hosts on here, maybe if we have a pool of AWS servers. And essentially how this is going to work is, let's say, for example, and they're giving us, two different views here. This is our Java user interface and the web user interface. But if we had, those inside and those outside hosts, we have some default policies that will be applied to the inside and the outside hosts. But if we want to trickle down and get more granular, we can always come up with policies by individual sub-host group, and that sub-host group is going to be an exception to the default. So you can kind of sort of think of this a little bit like Active Directory, but let's say, for example, our inside hosts, right? Anytime we had some large network scans, it's supposed to flag us or alarm us, but we want to make an exception to that rule because we do have some devices within our environment that we put into the network scanner category that should actually be doing scanning. So we can put an exception on this group so that, hey, let's not set in any alarms when those network scanners are doing their thing. All right, so very powerful, virtual containers, shares common characteristics. That's generally how we're going to divvy these guys up. Can be managed as a single object if we'd like. We can certainly have policies applied to each individual category, and we can make exceptions to the subcategories. All right, now what if we need to do some editing? So they give us some examples here of the user interface. So if we go into it and right click and edit, this is where our options are going to be if we want to go in and make modifications to the ranges of IPs, if we want to change the name. And there's some other things too that we can do within these options. So if we want to start sending flows to the cognitive threat analytics that we just talked about, we can enable or disable any of these things. Also, we said that there's this catch-all. Remember, that can't be deleted or it can't be moved, but this catch-all is usually where any IPs that haven't been identified are going to be dumped. So a lot of our RFC 1918 private addresses will be dumped here, and usually we're going to want to go in here and move some of the IPs out of that group and sort of reclassify them. So the initial maybe reclassification process might be a little bit of work. But once we sort of start automating things and get it up and running, Stealthwatch will give us the ability to, create those triggered alarms anytime we're exceeding our baselines. All right. Any other things that we might need to do if we're editing, maybe is, I don't know, disabling any groups. Possibly we might want to maybe disable the baselining or disable security events. So if we're maybe just temporarily testing something, and we need to sort of disable them, we can always, kind of go in and do those edits, generate the flows, all that good stuff. So just kind of comparing and contrasting some of the different views as well.